It's midday, and I'm going to kick this panel off, entitled Resilience, the Renaissance of Total Defense. I think there should be a question mark after the title. We will go to the fundamentals of defense, deterrence, and resilience. I've just flown up from Rome, where I was having various high-level meetings about the future of our alliance, particularly with regard to matters south. And after those discussions and listening to what I've heard this morning, I'm reminded of the wise words of the famous Thomas Hobbes, who wrote in 1651, "Covenants without the sword are but words, and of no strength to secure a man at all." And I think we are clearly at that point. I've been given two fundamental questions that this panel will discuss. What does the concept of total defense and resilience mean for NATO and its partners? The second question, what practical measures allies have to be developed and implemented to realize such a defense? Now, to discuss this very important set of issues, I have four very eminent panelists. First, Michael Carpenter, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense with responsibility for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. That's a narrow brief then, Mike, is it? Yeah. Second, Yanis Garnisons, the Secretary of State at the Latvian Ministry of Defense. Third, General Severik Göransson, the former Supreme Commander of the Swedish Armed Forces. And last, but certainly not least, my old friend, Dr. Bastian Gigerich, who is Director of Defense and Military Analysis at IISS in London. Gentlemen, you have 10 minutes each. Mike, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Julian. So I'll start by outlining what I think is a conceptual revolution in terms of Russian military thinking and review the concept of the so-called Gerasimov doctrine that was outlined by the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation in a well-known article that was published in 2013, where much of the hype that surrounded this article surrounded the use of so-called hybrid tactics. But in fact, to my mind, the tactics were not novel in any way and don't herald any new approach on the part of the Russian Federation with regards to its warfighting tactics and strategy, but rather the real conceptual innovation that Gerasimov pioneered is dispensing with the binary distinction between peacetime and war with a somewhat linear progression along a series of stages along which you mobilize resources to deal with the subsequent stage in the conflict until you reach the top of the escalation ladder. And that has been replaced with instead a view of competition short of conflict taking place across all domains in a sort of near continuous time frame. And this new conception of competition short of conflict, competition that effectively flies right below the radar of Article 5, seeks to take advantage of what have traditionally been Western strengths in warfighting, but not just in warfighting, and I'll get to this in a second, and turn them into weaknesses. So, for example, Western militaries, including the US military that rely extensively on net-centric warfare, obviously face vulnerabilities if that capability is degraded through either cyber attacks or electronic warfare capabilities. Similarly, a lot of our precision-guided munitions depend on the use of GPS and space assets, but that also provides a vulnerability if another country is able to develop anti-space capabilities. The preponderance of military strength in the West over the last several decades, if not longer, has been on overwhelming use of air power and naval power. And obviously the response there has been to develop niche capabilities in what is so-called anti-access area denial capabilities on the part of the Russian Federation, which seek to limit the ability of air power and naval power to flow into a theater at a time of conflict. And then finally, critical infrastructure is also vulnerable to a series of measures that can be taken short of overt attributable conflict. And so across all of these different measures, the Alliance and the United States have had to develop our own set of responses to this. So in terms of use of the internet, of space, we have had to develop workarounds that allow us to use redundancy and other measures to operate in contested environments. To deal with the so-called A2AD challenge, we've developed novel approaches that include new undersea platforms as well as payloads, as well as fifth-generation aircraft, new advanced electronic warfare systems that will allow us to operate into these zones. And then in terms of critical infrastructure, we've also had to develop novel capabilities to defend our most important national security interests. But the Russian conception of using this model of competition short of conflict does not extend solely to the military domain. So in fact, Russia has sought to use the strengths of Western societies again to turn them into weaknesses and to try to manipulate. And this is not just a threat that we face from the East. This is also a threat that we face very much from the South as well. So we look at our open media environment, and of course it is vulnerable to misinformation and propaganda campaigns. We look at the robust democratic pluralism of our Western societies, and these are also vulnerable to insidious attempts to undermine this pluralistic system by funding political parties that are either anti-establishment or that seek to contravening the prevailing consensus within a particular country on a particular issue. You look at the Western strength of our economies, which lies in free markets. And this is, again, vulnerable to various covert measures to influence economics through corruption, through money laundering, through other attempts to influence politics via economic means. And then finally, you look at energy and our open energy systems and mix of energy, and you see the use of increasingly the use of energy as a political tool or as a weapon to coerce or compel political outcomes. So I'll be brief. The answer to all of these challenges, whether it be in the military domain or in the non-military domain, is really to build resilience. And so I think this, the subject of this panel is very apropos given the set of challenges that we face today. And there are essentially I would submit to you, four solutions that we need to pursue. One is integration. This involves integration both of whole of government approaches, in other words, ministries of defense, working with ministries of interior, working with intelligence services, working with border guards, working with customs agencies, but also, and crucially, working with civil society actors and NGOs as well as private industry. The second mantra is transparency. We need to inject more transparency into our political systems, particularly in terms of media ownership, in terms of financing of political parties. And this is not something that is confined just to Europe or even Eastern Europe, but applies to my own country as well. The third critical goal that is incumbent upon us to deal with these asymmetric means of competition short of conflict is to introduce redundancy into our systems. We need to be able to operate in ways where we have backup plans, where we have workarounds, as I mentioned earlier. And some of these I can't get into for obvious reasons if we're talking about net-centric warfare, but there are other ways of operating that allow us to continue to prosecute the fight if we're talking about military means, or continue to operate critical infrastructure without relying on some of the systems that we rely on today. And then the last really is developing independence. So in Europe, particularly where there is dependence on Russia, or it doesn't have to be Russia, any single state actor for electricity, for natural gas, for energy, for other resources, there needs to be diversification and an ability not to have a dependency that therefore is a vulnerability that can be exploited. So in a nutshell, that's sort of how I feel the current sort of both military but also non-military environment is trending, and some of the steps that need to be taken.
Mike, thank you. That's admirably succinct and to the point. Let me ask you a brief question. Total defense implies an intimate relationship between the ability to protect and the ability to project. We talk a lot about our critical national infrastructures and their vulnerability, but just how vulnerable are our command critical infrastructures to a decapitation attack at the present?
Well, our national command and control is something that we look at all the time in terms of, again, maintaining that ability to reduce vulnerabilities, to ensure that there are no seams within the framework of NC3, which is so important to maintaining our deterrence, both our nuclear deterrence but also our conventional deterrence. I believe that in the United States we have developed a system where this is protected, but this is something that's incumbent on all of our NATO allies to look very carefully at command and control. Obviously, if you're looking for a key, crucial vulnerability early in a conflict, that's where you strike. And so we can't afford to be lax in this regard.
Quite so. Thank you. Yanis.
Well, thank you, Julian. Probably I will continue on the same note what Mike actually made, but simply from small countries' perspective, small countries living in the neighborhood of big power. I will take the same Gerasimov doctrine, but probably from a different, a little bit different angle. Because if you look on Gerasimov's doctrine, it's not only about different tools, but also it implies that Russia is in permanent state of war, because they already draw this kind of state that the surrounded fortress. And they have to basically be prepared, and they will be preparing, and they will do many things against us. And those actually so-called now hybrid things, they're happening right now, but this is a part of whole Russian doctrine, because that is also including military means. And I think this is the biggest problem for us to understand, because sometimes we in Europe or in NATO or in the European Union, we try to differentiate. For political reasons, we don't want mention so much military because, well, it's escalatory, many things. But for Russians, actually, it doesn't matter. They show that military, it's very, use of military, the threshold is very low. And that, I think, is the biggest problem for us. And I think what we have to look more on this psychological aspect, so psychological resilience, because we've been experiencing this kind of influence in the Baltics for 20 years. And I have to say, I'm happy that that now the same happenings in the United States, Russians meddling in your elections, the same happens in many other things. By the way, we can probably...
Not quite so happy.
No, but you see, probably we can share some experience how to deal with that, because we have certainly some experience for 25 years. But I think the big issue, how to make our societies resilient from this psychological pressure. And that is including information warfare, psychological warfare, and all this military show of force what's going on. And I'm convinced that it will be worse. We saw Admiral Kuznetsov going to the south. We saw those two corvettes coming to the Baltics. Of course, it's a show of force, and it's the only thing what I can imagine what Russia wants to achieve. It's psychologically impact us. And I think that is a big issue, how actually we make our societies resilient towards those different kind of influence. Because, of course, it's very clear that Russian strategy is, they're not following Clausewitz, they're following Sun Tzu. They want to beat us before the battle. And they want to actually psychologically defeat us. And that, I think, is what we have to probably focus, because if we were broken psychologically, and I think it's a big issue here in the Baltics, because we are facing this on a daily basis, all information warfare that's going on. You know, we actually turn attention whenever we say that Latvia is defendable and we will defend it. This is the biggest numbers of trolls now attacking than those narratives, because of course they don't like the narrative that we will defend, and we will defend our country. There's no question about that. But that is what actually they don't like, and therefore we have to find a way how to make this our society resilient. And I see the only option at this point to go back, and we, I think, already on the road there, to go back to traditional total defense concept. Because any kind of, in the last Warsaw Summit, there was a declaration on resilience, but this resilience doesn't talk and doesn't include this kind of psychological information part of society. Only way, if you're facing basically a comprehensive approach from your other side, and I believe we're facing actually very well thought comprehensive approach from Russians, we have to be prepared on the same ground. We have to have total defense. And therefore, I think, including very clear understanding of society, that there might be need to protect our country, and we have to be ready. And therefore, we've been developing National Guard as a base for basically engagement of society. And if I would be asked what is my let's say vision for or goal how to achieve it, if every person of citizen of Latvia would be honored to serve in National Guard, I think we are safe. We are safe, then we don't need to worry about. And of course we have also Youth Guard. We have to protect our youngsters, because they try to meddle in our affairs. They try to poison our youngsters, take to the boot camps and things like that. And of course, another part of resilience where we actually doing a lot already on decentralization, because in our situation, decentralization is very important, starting from command, chain of command, and ending with decentralization of weapons, ammunition, and many things else. And therefore, unfortunately, you know, there's always this discussion, are we back in the Cold War? Probably we are not in the Cold War, but back in the Cold War, but we have to use means of Cold War. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. I have to say that the sight of a clapped-out Russian aircraft carrier in the English Channel, belching black smoke, might have had the wrong impact. Certainly on the British people. I don't think we were hugely impressed. Are we conceptually clear, Yanis, that we're talking about total defense or total security? Because it strikes me that we're talking about resiliency of societies and hardening of military capabilities. And that really is about protection and projection, therefore it's total security rather than total defense.
No, I want to be very specific. I think, at least I talking about total defense, because I think the military aspect is very important. We have this, discussions here in the country. What we have to do if there's a war? Well, if you are part of, let's say, National Guard, you will know what to do. This is your place, this is your weapon, you will not have any questions about that. I think that kind of military component is very important.
That clarity of analysis will require clarity of leadership. And that will be the challenge. Sverker, talking of clarity of leadership.
Thank you very much, Julian. And let me then add, as said, from a small nation, but at least I would argue a big partner, some thoughts concerning total defense as part of a new strategy. And I will start off by extending what the former president said this morning. I mean, we are, after almost 25 years of strategic timeout, or some would label it holiday from history, witnessing the return of geopolitics to the Baltic area. But in a world that is very globalized and ever-changing, so the circumstances in which we are doing this is very different from what they were during the Cold War. But I agree with the other panelists that have said, fundamentally, the current situation in the region is driven by Russia's political and military behavior. In the behavior today, we can see Russia with a clear strategic capability. They are able to deploy over long distances, as Syria, and also has capability to combine effects from different weapon systems, from the air and from the sea, as they have done in Syria as well. So it's a strategic capability that is much different than the one we saw during the Cold War. So I would argue what we see today, no matter what we say, is a Russia 2.0, that have returned globally in a different manner. In my mind, we better get used to it, or as Anders Östlund said, this unfolding reality will be with us for the foreseeable future. And like the containment strategy during the Cold War, the response to this new challenge will have to be implemented in a range of areas, as the others have mentioned, patiently and consistently. So I would argue, brace yourself for a marathon rather than a sprint race. The Russians are not only, as said, enhancing their military capability. I would also argue that hybrid warfare has become the preferred modus operandi. And this has been described, as said, by my former counterpart, General Gerasimov, when writing Doctrine in December 2014, where the adversary is to be broken without firing a bullet. So we will have to come back to that. In my view, you can label hybrid warfare in many names. I would say full spectrum conflict, as it better conveys the basic feature of the phenomenon. All available means, also military, in order to achieve your objectives. And this is clearly demonstrated, I would say, also in the actions in Ukraine. You can also view it by checking the well-directed information actions labeled as different news channels or media. And we spoke last night about info deterrence, because it's there all the time as well. And as theory of war dictates, it's designed to exploit the adversary's weaknesses. In this case, it aims to do so by operating in our gray zones between peace, between military and civilian realms. But note also that hybrid requires a mix of conventional and unconventional forces. So this new strategic situation, which include a mix of complex challenges as terrorism, hybrid threat, force us more than ever, as also mentioned, to cooperate with others in many domains, in our respective nations, but also between the nations and between the organizations. So to work different things in cooperation, I would argue, is a key factor of deterrence as part of a developed regional or transatlantic strategy for the future. Now the Baltic Sea region is also exposed to other challenges as climate change, migration, social tensions, issues related to cyber. And as we all are aware of, these challenges are not isolated to our own part of the world, they are global as well. So what we are facing is a combination of complicated regional security, which is also affected by different global challenges. And we have to tackle these challenging combinations of issues in a world where the spirit of solidarity among countries and inside countries sometimes is challenged as well. Therefore, I would argue, when talking about new total defense, we need to think really new, really bold, also wider, and of course, as we always say, outside the box. This is the reason, in my mind, talking about Total Defense 3.0, so the very next step. But Total Defense 3.0 also requires a developed transatlantic strategy built on unity, deterrence, and resilience between us, all of us, that stands for the same values. And in order to obtain a developed transatlantic strategy on this broad issue, we also need to define our common goals nationally as well as internationally and regionally. And the national strategies should link in to the regional strategy. And in Europe, I believe the new EU global strategy for the EU foreign and security policy is a good base of starting discussions. And the regional strategy should then link in to the transatlantic relation as well. If we are to reach these goals, we need to think of how to work integrated and how to reach synergies. Here I believe trust between parties of utmost importance, and we also have to nurture and defend our common democratic values. We need to have this common base of trust and understanding because the process of crafting a modern total defense concept, both nationally and transnationally, will require even more interaction between national and international legislation. For that matter, in a changing world, we need a well-functioning EU as well, apt to meet the challenges ahead. Here I'd like to focus on the issues connected to capabilities so Europe can maintain its role as a strategic partner to the United States. If Europe won't be able to take the responsibility for its fundamental security, we might not be the strategic partner we think we are or do our part of the new strategy. Diplomatically, we need to work together in order to defend and uphold the principles on collective security. We need also to find arenas where we can discuss how we tackle a full spectrum conflict, including how we strengthen our total defense so we can prepare our societies to act and react if something should happen. But we also need to constantly work on different confidence building issues so we can prevent unnecessary escalation. And if we want to be able to react in a coordinated manner, we need to find and develop mechanisms which permit us to discuss different scenarios and how we might act together if needed. For Sweden, of course, as we spoke about yesterday, military non-alignment is key. But you should take in mind, as was mentioned last night, the solidarity clause that put us in a completely different situation than we used to have during the Cold War. So that could be also a key part of a new strategy, of course. And expanding, as we have said over these 2 days, the Nordic and the Nordic-Baltic military cooperation is and will continue to be a key priority for Sweden. Maybe it would be logic to expand this Nordic-Baltic cooperation to include some kind of reflections concerning a new concept on total defense. The concept has to be new since the circumstances it needs to deal with is new. All challenges that we as nations or organizations face will have to be solved by cooperation, and that includes home turf as well as far away. So when I talk about home turf within Total Defense 3.0, it needs to be said as well that we have to make sure that our national resources for military defense is robust. After many years of reduced spending, the Swedish defense is on a low level concerning quantity. We still have very high quality in remaining units as well as equipment, but far too little training in recent years. So the new defense resolution in Sweden that have increased all key parts, including spending, needs a follow-up to make sure that we have a robust military capability, including all demands, air, sea, land, cyber, and command and control, enough to form a base of a Total Defense 3.0. Without that, there is no reason to discuss total defense. And you need, of course, where we are, consider if you need to reboost the decision already now to make the pace even faster. Besides the military, also all civilian capabilities needs to develop a robustness that allow them to work effective in a total defense 3.0, which Jan just mentioned. The civilian part in today's society is and will continue to be important to be able to deal with all parts of full spectrum conflict. To make society robust, a lot of things remains to be seen and done in Sweden, and I would argue also elsewhere. Sweden is a very globalized country, and so is our economy. We depend on a functioning open market with open trade and business. And we firmly believe that democracy built on human rights in a world that is open with free trade best serves the human race for the future. To make this work, all of us that share those values need to work together based on those important values. So I'm sure that Sweden will do our part to work for stable conditions, a free flow of business around the globe. I would also say in those cases it requires military force, as we spoke about last night. We should be ready to do so as well, out of solidarity for the free and democratic world where people can live in peace and enjoy the open market. So I would say we are on our course to defend this peace with a Swedish Total Defense 3.0, but it needs to be part of a national and regional strategy, and also in the linkage of a transatlantic strategy is in this new situation. And to make sure that work, I will stress once more, we need to make sure that we have a continuous economic reinvestment in our military defense. Because if you want resilience, you have to invest in both military and civilian. Thank you.
Thank you, Sverker. It goes again, total defense is utterly reliant upon political leadership and vision.
Absolutely.
That's the driving factor. By the way, it wasn't holiday from history, it was strategic vacation, and I invented it. I'm co-leading a major project with General John Allen on NATO adaptation. What would you, as a major partner of the alliance, advise? What would you think adaptation means to a country like Sweden?
I would argue that we have done a lot of things recent years. I mean, we had a parliamentary decision back in 1996, if I remember correctly, that we should be completely NATO interoperable. And we have dealt with that issue in the military since then to make sure whatever equipment you acquire, whatever training you do, you should make sure it's possible to link in. Yeah. And then recent years, in Brussels, we have worked also in a task force together with the 7NNN, as we label ourselves, Australia, Sweden, Finland, and so on. How could we be even better, and that goes for both sides, the partners as well as NATO, so we can plug and play, not play, I mean operationally. So when you go into an operation outside Somalia or whatever it is, we are ready to just hook on, because there are a lot of more obstacles historically than there should be for the future if we want to work together, as I just said. So adaptation, continue that path, and that will help you tremendously.
I mean, that's NATO 3.0,
yeah.
A new relationship between allies and partners, which force multipliers our influence, deterrence and defense. I think it's vital. Bastian.
Julian, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I think total defense is a bit like your style of chairmanship, Julian. Sometimes charming, often menacing, but always focused and coordinated. So you kept us exactly on time, and I'm not going to try and ruin your record. I think, but to pick up one of the things you said earlier, while there can be total defense and total chairmanship, there can't be total security, I think. And I think we should actually be careful and not confuse those things. I don't want to dwell a lot on the Gerasimov doctrine or whether it even exists, but react a little bit or pick out some of the things that we've discussed so far and react to them a little bit. I think there are three different dimensions of total defense that I've heard and that I think in national governments and in a multinational setting are being discussed. One is a rather old-fashioned and traditional, just simply bringing together civil defense and military defense. And I think, to use a a German compound noun, what is known as Gesamtverteidigung. You know, that's a very traditional, not very innovative, but nonetheless necessary element of total defense 3.0. It has to do with, yes, on the civilian side, with emergency preparedness, all these kinds of things. The second element, I think, goes a little bit more in the direction of what Julian has said when he introduced the panel. That is really about, in the military sense, about full spectrum operations, offensive, defensive, but also military assistance to civilian authorities and linking all of that up. So while the first one is more located on the national government level, I would say the second one, that full spectrum, generating that full spectrum capability is a very important question for NATO. And then the third element, I think, is about all of us as societies, namely that whole of society approach, which probably is something that northern countries are actually more familiar with than some of the rest of us in the alliance. And it is, of course, about government, the private sector, but also the citizen making a contribution to that total defense, and actually understanding that as a task for society rather than something that is just a task for government. And to me, that last bit is, when we then link that to resilience, is actually where it connects, or where it connects most directly, perhaps, and where it is most relevant. Because I think we shouldn't pretend that resilience is going to turn into a silver bullet for NATO, for the alliance. It's not going to be the one-step answer, even if we could agree what it actually means. But I think it does focus on a couple of very useful elements. And one is, to begin with, something very simple but actually difficult to do, is that we need to reduce our own vulnerabilities. You know, not just because that is a measure of prevention, but that is also an element of deterrence. Because if you take your opponent's ability away to exploit these vulnerabilities, you reduce the likely or perhaps expected payoff of a certain action. So we need to think about it in those terms. And of course, you cannot be resilient unless you're joined up, as was explained. You cannot expect to withstand disruption. You cannot expect to be able to adapt while under attack unless you're joined up within a country, across countries, within an alliance, within an EU setting, or whatever it actually is. And I think if we look at what measures governments and NATO and the EU have actually taken over the last 24 months or so, they point in the right direction, you know, regarding reversing that decline in defense spending that has plagued many of our countries, reconsidering some of the manpower implications of that, strengthening deterrence, working on the speed of decision-making, or in the military sense, working on readiness questions, and beginning to map risks against, or vulnerabilities against responsibilities, in order to figure out who actually needs to do what, so that, you know, it becomes clear whether the first line of defense is on the national level or on the multinational level. Very often it will be on the national level. And I think, you know, in that sense, if we then look to our opponent, and we shouldn't be surprised that they try to exploit our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. I mean, that is, if you're not doing that, then you're stupid. You know, if you're somebody's opponent and do not try and do exactly that, then you're foolish. So you know, that shouldn't come as a surprise to us, but undoubtedly we still need to grapple with what that actually means. And in that sense, I wouldn't say what we should be striving for in resilience is independence. Diversity is, I think, better. You know, being not dependent. Independence sounds to me a bit too inward-looking for a lot of our societies and a lot of our economies as well. So what we want is diversification, so that we are not dependent. I don't think we want to be independent. I think that seems to me to be the wrong idea. And on I'm coming up to my 8-minute mark here, but on that last on that point that was raised about the psychological aspects of resilience and of modern warfare, I think that's very important. I would say though Sun Tzu and Clausewitz come together here because our cohesion and our will and our determination has turned into our center of gravity, perhaps in some of these conflicts. So I think there is a big puzzle there, and I want to conclude by since we said we need total defense 3.0. Russia is waging competition short of warfare. Russia 2.0. I think to me Russia as a country seems to be going back to 0.5 or something like that. It's just that maybe that is actually more difficult for us to deal with than a movement in the other direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bastian. During your remarks, I tried to be a 21st century chairman by joining the conference Twitter feed, but being an old man, technology failed me. We talked about total. What do we mean by total? 2 points here. I chaired a panel in Canada a couple of weeks ago with specialists on microbiology, nanotechnology, cyber in its expansive form. And I was struck that if we're really talking about total, we've got to get our heads around the game-changing technologies that could even redefine what defense means. Mm-hmm. And the second point I'd ask you to respond to is, why are we being so defensive about this? Why do we leave Russia the space to conduct hybrid warfare operations and cyber operations against us? Why don't we also complicate their own calculus by demonstrating that we can do the same, if not more? Would that not be part of deterrence?
Thanks, Julian. I think I'll start with that last part because I think that's really very interesting, because when we look at our own discourse and conversation around hybrid warfare, indeed, we talk about defending against hybrid warfare, and we seem to accept that we have a structural asymmetry here, that we as Western liberal democracies cannot engage in hybrid warfare because we would have ethical concerns, we would have legitimacy concerns, and frankly, probably we would be too slow to get our decision-making going in the way that would be required. And I think that's worth thinking about a little more, whether that is actually true. And not in the sense of aren't color revolutions, the Western way of hybrid warfare, but at the same time, maybe owning a little more these kinds of measures that deal with promoting our ideas about international order and the way that business should be conducted. I think it's surprising to me that is not a bigger part of the conversation. And I think what when your second point about what does total mean, well, as I said earlier, I think what we shouldn't pretend is that it means free from risk. That we cannot have that, and there shouldn't be a misconception in the public domain, in public discourse, that is achievable. And I think you mentioned technology and the disruptive effect that it might have on conflict in ways that we cannot even, that we can try to imagine, but certainly we will get it at least half wrong. So the goal, as always in defense planning at least, should be to be not so wrong that you cannot react when things change around you.
Thank you. Right, we have 45 minutes left. I'm going to preserve the last 10 minutes for the panel to make its final remarks. The floor is now open. I will take questions in batches of 3, starting first over there, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. David Andelman from USA Today. I hope I might have a two-pronged question.
A quick one, please.
Yes. The first is, I hope, a somewhat more substantive reply than my same question to the first panel, which was simply, God help us. But there have been some fairly dramatic events in Washington that will affect perhaps the U.S. elections. And so what is your prognosis for possible Russian reaction in the event that either Donald Trump becomes the next president, or that there is some considerable sentiment rising in his direction? The second question, after a 2-week tour of the 3 Baltic states, I found several people have suggested to me that when we're talking about war, total war or war 3.0, I believe the gentleman from Sweden suggested, that people would be prepared to take to the woods and the maquis, as it were, so that in the event of a future Soviet adventure Russian adventure in these parts of the world, do you see that as a realistic threat that Russia would be concerned that they might be drawn into a new Afghanistan, a quagmire of sorts, should they attempt some sort of an adventure in the Baltics?
Thank you, sir. Question towards the middle on my right.
Thank you. Anke Schmidt-Fetzmann, Swedish Institute of International Affairs. I want to focus on the total defense, totalförsvar concept, and there's two issues that arise from the Swedish context from recent debates and developments. And one of that is the issue of, we're talking about the national level or the transatlantic and European level, but there's also a tension between the national government and the local authorities, and I wondered what your thoughts are on that. And to clarify what I mean, we have had discussions about a wind park in Blekinge Bay, Hanöbukten, and we have had also discussions about the renting out of harbor facilities on the island of Gotland, Slite Harbor, and also Karlshamn and Karlskrona before with Nord Stream 1 and now Nord Stream 2. And the question here is about to what extent in this total defense idea it is possible who should govern that? Because we have the political decisions at the national, at the local level, we have business interests, and we have external actors that can exploit that. So from your practical experience as practitioners or as a researcher and as a decision maker, how do you see that? How can that gap be closed somehow? And the second issue is the business interests that can interfere, and that we now have a lot of private companies and a liberalized European Union, telecommunications, in the energy sector, electricity and gas, and the provision of the necessary goods for that total defense to be possible is divided between the state and often just handed over to private businesses. So how do you see how we can move forward with that to actually make the societies, countries, different local regions more resilient? Thank you.
Thank you. And a third question was, sir, your hand up in the middle towards the back. Then we'll have some answers, and then the next round of three.
Thank you very much. Andras Raats from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, Helsinki. A short question to State Secretary Garrisons. You spoke about the possibility of total defense. My question is, would it also mean the reintroduction of conscription, let's say? Because in Lithuania it took place, and Sweden it took place, in some Central European countries are considering the setup of territorial defense units. So would also Latvia start with conscription? Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'm going to split the questions up. A Russian reaction to President Trump. Mike, you can take that, and Bastian can take that. Mike.
Well, as a Pentagon official, I'm actually going to take a pass on any political question. I'll address the second aspect of the question on insurgency and mobilization of society. And I think that the threat, and I alluded to this in my introductory comments, I think some of the tools that we have for dealing with the threats from the East are actually comparable to the tools that we use to dealing with the threats from the South. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about countering violent extremism, we're mobilizing our societies, we're working with civil society to gain information about potential radicals within our midst that might be prone to perpetrating acts of violence. And so as we look at the possibility for little green men, or what I like to call little gray men, which means little green men essentially without the uniforms and the badges and the paraphernalia, one also has to build that sort of societal resilience. And so this gets to local communities, it gets to community leaders outside of government, it gets to civil society organizations and all of that. That is part of societal resilience.
Bastian, you're not so constrained as Mike. What's your Moscow's view of a President Trump?
Yes, I just realized that sometimes being constrained is actually rather nice. I don't think any of us know what a President Trump would actually do. So I'm not going to speculate on that. But you know, if this were David, if this were a percentage game, you know, we talked earlier about the possibility of Russia looking for a short and winnable or victorious war under certain circumstances. I would say right now that possibility is very, very low, that this kind of contingency would fall into this category. I would say, though, that in my personal humble opinion, President Trump would make that a little less low.
Yanis, mobilization, Latvian Maquis, reintroduction of conscription?
Yeah, can I? I'm
No.
not going to comment on U.S. elections on Mr. Trump, but I think what I can say, what all those Russian activities during last 2 weeks, what we've seen, all those adventures of ships, civil defense exercise, Syria, violation of Finnish and Estonian borders. I think basically, you know, on the path of what they're doing, they escalating until the new administration will come into office. That, I think, is very clear. It's traditional, the tactics escalate and then they escalate, and then, but whomever will come into office, they will have to deal with escalated situation, and they will have to de-escalate. That is very clear, and probably they preparing for the most unlikely, not so welcome scenario in Moscow. On Baltics. What my point was, it's not. I think it's not the point to discuss scenarios. We can, you know, there might be different scenarios. The point is what I try to make. We need resilience, and resilience of population you can achieve in many ways. But I think the most efficient way is basically to make ready your citizens to defend your country. And it doesn't matter what kind of scenario will come, they will be ready. And, yeah, and the point was to make them ready psychologically, because I think we partially also, our problem is the syndrome of 1940, because we didn't fight, contrary to Finns, and I think it was a mistake. And I think it's recognized broadly. And another probably syndrome is that we didn't spend enough on defense previous years, and now we facing situation when basically we don't feel secure. If we would would have sufficient military right now, I would not say that we would worry so much. That, I think that is about your what I talked about as total defense, as general resilience of your population. On conscription, I expected it, of course, this question. We are, yeah, white sheep or black sheep, I don't know. Everybody does, why not we? No, therefore, I talked about our national defense, national guard concept. We made analysis on going back to conscription. And the 2 points what we actually, why decision so far has been negative, because we need reaction time right now, and that we can't afford right now to change anything and reduce our combat readiness, because we are not in the middle of the 90s when we were able to do many things. We require combat readiness, and we can't change the system right now without losing combat readiness. Another important aspect is our National Guard, who is part of armed forces and who is territorially based, and who actually has weapons at home. Part of them have weapons at home, and they will be able to react in few hours, contrary to reserve system, which will require days to mobilize. And it's very clear that we can't afford right now all three systems: conscription, professional, and National Guard. And therefore, we decided to stay currently with a professional army, which are going, the numbers going up, and with National Guard, which has been retrained, rearmed, and many other things. And I can, yeah.
Thank you, Yanis. Good answer. Sverker, total defense, the power of the state, and political accountability.
First of all, I would argue, don't get stuck in different scenarios, as Janis said, because that will have, well, maybe the possibility that you never get out and don't know what way you actually went out. Talking about total defense, I would argue you need to take an approach on, which I tried to say before, what values, open market, democracy, and all of those that you're ready to defend. And then you need to go home and look into it and say, we need to have a whole of security functioning society approach. And by having so, then you can also start focusing on different areas in your country, not only civil and military, but combine them and make them robust. The financial system, the energy system, whatever you have. And that needs to be governed, of course, by the government and parliament. But those who are military experts, for example, need to advise how best do their part in this. So it's really a whole of security and functioning society approach I will argue for.
Thank you. Right, the next three questions. There was a question, sir, here, with a pink tie.
May I
halfway down. Sorry?
That was one thing we missed.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a second,
There was
please.
a question also concerning the business interest. And I would add to that, a tricky thing today for us. I mean, a number of things used to be owned by government and controlled by government. But that also defines now, when it's privately owned, industry is one example, you need to find solutions and contracts with them as well. And I would argue if everybody is aware of why are we doing this, they will be eager and keen to join that agreement as well.
Absolutely. Yanis, very quickly, please.
And there is another basically tool to be used, it's investment control. We've been working on that right now because you need, if you don't want unwelcome investors who might impact your security to invest in certain infrastructure, you simply to have the pattern of investment control. And it exists in many countries.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to recognize the hands as I think I've seen them. Gentleman with the pink tie here, halfway down. Please bring the mic. Would you stand up, please, sir? And announce who you are as well, please.
Special Military Press Association. We heard about the fact of psychological resilience. We heard about the need for intergovernmental approach, ministries talking to ministries, governments to governments, a whole of resilience approach, total defense. All these measures are undoubtedly necessary and indispensable, but don't we try to camouflage the fact by that Europe had let emerge a military conventional capabilities vacuum since '91? Isn't exactly this military conventional capabilities vacuum the root cause, the breeding ground that Gerasimov Doctrine can come to grips? So in other words, isn't it a simple excuse for the Europeans not to fill up this power vacuum first? Shouldn't we do that first and then skip to the roof of the building this total defense idea? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Question down the front here. Sir.
Hello, my name is Gits Valdis Kristovskis. I am establisher and first commander of National Guard and also Minister of Defense 5.5 years. I would like to say that I very appreciate Mr. Garrison's position. It's very close to mine because, in my opinion, in Latvia we really can't talk about total defense as in Sweden, let's say, United States or Great Britain or in Germany, because the question is one, whether we have resource. Maybe we have a public will, this is one, but whether our economy is really ready and government can demonstrate political will to support this concept. Currently we can say no, and for next 10, 15, I don't know, 20 years, we never will have in our government resources such amount of money which requires really total defense system. That's why currently question is, what is our priorities? And this is maybe a question to Mr. Garrison, because many times we know during last years is announced that National Guard must be supported, and National Guard is one of our priorities. But how big is this resource which must be invested to support just 20 battalions of National Guard? Because I think that very important is to put in the place main weapon systems currently, air defense, anti-tank missiles, all those systems. Before we don't have those weapon systems in our assets, we can't think about this concept.
Thank you, sir. And third question in this round, I'm going to go over there. Sir, yellow tie, stand up, please.
Yeah, it's Kalmanch. I'm chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Latvian Parliament. We talked about redundancy as a part of resilience. European Union's talking about a European army. Is that a good redundancy or a bad redundancy? And does it make sense if the present NATO members haven't fulfilled their 2% requirement within the NATO context? Thank you.
Right, three very interesting questions. Capability vacuum, which I'll give to Bastian. How much threat can you afford, Yanis? Give to you. And this issue of, dare I mention it, a European army.
Who's getting that one?
And, of course, the mythical 2% of GDP on defence. Mike and Sverker, maybe you'll deal with that. Bastian, capability vacuum.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think, you know, that is an obvious concern. I don't quite agree with the way you phrased it, because I don't think it's not an attempt to camouflage anything. I think conventional weakness has contributed to the situation we're in. That's true, but I don't think the kind of activities that we here and in the conference refer to as hybrid warfare or Gerasimov doctrine or whatever you want to use are based on the perception that conventionally we're militarily weak, but it's exploiting other vulnerabilities actually. Although I do agree that this is a vulnerability, and I think I think though it's a recognized vulnerability, and actually people are now, after, in my personal view, too long a period of sustained cuts, which have led to real capability gaps, widening capability gaps, are now coming around to trying to address that and fill those. And I just wanted to, in order to, make it short, I would say if you compare the Wales summit and the Warsaw summit, you'll see that change, because when Wales was all about readiness and rapid response, Warsaw adds the need to develop conventional heavy forces in order that reinforcement and rapid response actually is a credible, sustainable option, and that was absent from Wales. It's now part of the picture, so I think people are beginning to address it.
Let me push you a bit on that, Bastian, because there's a second half of the Gerasimov doctrine, which looks very much like the old Agarkov doctrine, the role of nuclear weapons in warfighting. What impact do you think this implied reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons in the order of battle has on conventional deterrence of the alliance and NATO's nuclear posture?
I think it has made NATO's deterrence posture look rather brittle, because it does suggest that if you are in Moscow and think you can achieve a temporary and geographically restricted conventional superiority fast, and we are in our mindset of trading space for time,
yep,
and then are willing to escalate to de-escalate, then NATO has a real problem, and I think that's not resolved yet. But I think, again, I would say it's recognized as a problem now, which is, again, better than where we were 18 months ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yanis, how much threat can you afford? Tough choices.
Well, it depends. I think actually what has been done so far, we very clearly identify our strategy and we clearly identify our priorities, because probably previously we had problem of we want to develop everything and at the end we didn't have nothing. Therefore, it's very clear said that our main priority and our force is land-centric. And our main priorities, of course, are early warning, because we want to see, we want to be warned as much as possible, even we know it's actually sometimes it's very difficult due to reaction time of Russian units around our borders. That is the first priority. The second priority is mobile, very able to react professional force. It includes air defense, short-range air defense, and mobility platforms with prudent anti-tank capabilities, and special operation forces, also including able to react to hybrid warfare, take care of whatever green means, this, or black or white or pink. And the last is, of course, the National Guard, which is light infantry, territorial base, and able to react and delay and basically to cause as much trouble and blood to the enemy.
Thank you. Sverker, European Army, will it ever happen?
No, I certainly hope so not. I mean, if you read the EU global strategy now, or you listen in to all advice that I have heard, and now I can have my own opinion nowadays, which is much easier, but that's a different thing. The EU and NATO should be complementary, because there are a lot of security policy tools in the respective boxes. And let them be there, because it's basically the same nations, all of it. Not all, but close to. So if you allow that, we can also effectively develop the relationship between European Union and NATO in those aspects, as now labeled in the global strategy. So I would say no European army besides the one that already exists within NATO.
Thank you. Mike, this 2% target, A, is it feasible, achievable, and B, how important is it to the United States that goal is achieved?
I think it's first of all, it's eminently feasible within all countries in the alliance. And I would say that, as you've seen from the recent debate in the United States, it is extremely important. It is not just that the additional resources from going from whatever it is, 1.6 to 1.7% up to 2 is going to provide all that much more capability for the alliance. But it is having skin in the game. It is this notion of equity across the board. I mean, the American public, as you've seen in recent months, has wondered aloud, why is it that the United States is bearing the lion's share of the costs for extended deterrence as well as for conventional deterrence and defense in Europe? And we do it for self-interested reasons. We have, we're big advocates of continuing to play a major role in NATO, but particularly in countries that face an imminent threat, to be less than 2.0. I mean, 2.0 is just a benchmark. I mean, these countries, frankly, should be at 3, 4, 5%, given the threats that they face. And so, Bob Gates made this point, and I know it rankled a little bit in Europe with various audiences when he made it, but the point is very much still relevant today. How can we be in an existential crisis with a threat from the East and find countries here in this part of Europe that are struggling to get to 2? I mean, 2 is the minimum benchmark. We spent, depending on the measure that you use, 3.8, 3.9% of our GDP on defense in the United States. And then if I can, just to get back to the question earlier that the gentleman raised about conventional inferiority, I mean, I think it's absolutely true that both the United States and certainly our NATO allies have spent much of the last 2 decades focused on counterinsurgency capabilities. And so our skill sets in terms of full spectrum warfighting have atrophied. And there's no doubt that we need to improve those. But this is quite a separate issue from the manipulation of elections by funding political parties. It is separate from the use of energy as a political tool. It is separate from a lot of these other competition short of conflict issues that we face today that we're talking about on this panel. Cyber. The fact that there are cyber vulnerabilities is not in any way related to the diminishment of conventional capabilities. And by the way, on the reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons as part of doctrine, I don't think there's any reintroduction. I think that's been there all along. And so, I think it's worth reminding the audience that NATO is a nuclear alliance. It will remain a nuclear alliance as long as nuclear weapons exist. And the fundamental bedrock that stands behind this is U.S. extended deterrence for our NATO allies. And that's why we are at great cost, over $100 billion with a B, investing in the life extension program for the B-61, the long-range strike bomber, the replacement for the Ohio class of submarines. We take this very, very seriously. But this then gets back to 2%. Look at the resources that we're spending. This is for our defense too. We're not doing this, out of purely altruistic motives, but we need to see that our allies have skin in the game. It's very important for the American public, not just for policymakers.
You'll be pleased to know, Mike, that last week the first deal was cut on HMS Dreadnought, the successor British ballistic missile fleet. So we have skin in the game, chaps. My last three questions before I close the list. Sir, in the middle here. And then Kate. And then one right at the back there.
My name is Mark Voyager. I work for Allied Land Command NATO. My question is regarding an aspect of hybrid warfare that always remains understudied, but it's extremely potent and effective, and it's Russian lawfare, the way Russia exploits international law. Russia obviously is a member of the Security Council, but it also matches legal with lethal, if you will, in contested areas such as the Arctic or the Black Sea, contested borders. General Gerasimov himself expounded on his understanding of hybrid earlier this year when he posited that hybrid actually deprives the target nation of its sovereignty without the aggressor having to occupy its entire territory. So my question is, we're trying to address our deficiencies and weaknesses. Are we sufficiently prepared to answer the Russian challenge, the lawfare, where we're strong? That is how Russia exploits our strength, our own international legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate?
Kate Hansen-Bundt from Norway, the Norwegian Atlantic Committee. It was mentioned last evening that the Nordic countries, the Baltics and Poland together spend half as much as the Russian Federation together on military kit and defense. It's a large amount of money. I would like to ask the whole panel on the benefits and cost of closer Nordic-Baltic cooperation. We are marked by different international memberships. We are small states, and military kit costs a lot of money. What can we achieve by a closer cooperation between the Nordic and Baltic states?
Thank you, Kate. And towards myself.
I'm Zdzisław Śliwa from Baltic Defense College. And Russia was mentioned quite often here as a single entity, doctrine, capabilities, and so on. My question is connected with two security organizations in which Russia is playing quite prominent role. I mean Collective Security Treaty Organization with Belarus, as I would say a very important neighbor, and another one, which is Shanghai Cooperation Organization, although focused on fighting three evils, but having China inside and exercising much above three evils threat. Do you think that, what is your opinion about their role for Russia, and maybe they should be treated as facade organization and just ignored? Thank you.
So could you just repeat the specific question, because I wasn't entirely clear. What's the specific point?
What is the role of those two organizations, security organizations for Russia? Should they be just treated as facade organization and just ignored?
Thank you. Right. We've got 7 minutes before we have the wrap-up. Can I give Bastian this Russian lawfare question? It is a genuine challenge, their ability to manipulate international institutions and treaties?
Well, I can try. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. You might be surprised to hear. So, you know, the point about, I think the vulnerability is there is that we as Western countries are often ourselves not very coherent in the way that we apply certain norms. So there is, of course, in international law always the difference between legality and legitimacy, and we you know, we work on that as well. Obviously, I think that's unavoidable. Are we doing enough to address it? I don't know. It's not my area at all. I don't have anything to say on that. So, you know, I'm not sure what the right answer is there. If I may, two sentences on this question of what's in Nordic cooperation. I mean, there are others more qualified, but I think it's worth repeating that the theoretical advantages should be clear to everybody now that there's a shared threat perception, which have to do with efficiency of spending, with effectiveness of armed forces and interoperability, and trust when it comes to working together on operations. The challenge, as always, is to take that theoretical insight and turn it into practical programs. And I'm afraid there, in that sense, Nordic countries have not done much better than the rest of us.
Mike, you wanted to comment on that?
So on the international law question, I mean, I think this is actually fundamental. I think we could have an entire panel on this. You have, I mean, with the invasion of Georgia and Ukraine, the violation of the fundamental tenets of the UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act. You've got Russia currently suspending its implementation of the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which is a fancy word for violating the CFE Treaty. It's currently violating the Intermediate Nuclear Range Forces Treaty. And then not on the international law side, but in terms of agreements that Russia has reached, it never fulfilled the letter of the Sarkozy 6-point ceasefire for Georgia. It has not fulfilled the letter of either the so-called Minsk I or Minsk II agreements on Ukraine. And it has not fulfilled the letter of the agreement that it reached on the cessation of hostilities in Syria. So, in fact, we find a violation of both international norms, international law, but also non-legal commitments across the board. This is of enormous consequence. And what we ought to be doing, I think it's very clear what we ought to be doing. We have to impose costs for this. There's not always a military solution to each of these issues, but there is certainly a rationale for imposing costs. And that's why now, as the European Union starts to think about sanctions renewal, I mean, this is, to me, it's absolutely vital that there continue to be consequences for these actions. If Russia, if the Kremlin is able to look back 5, 10, 15 years from now on its adventure in Ukraine and conclude that the benefits exceeded the costs, it'll do it again somewhere else. I mean, it's inevitable. So this is actually a fundamental question about the international order, and it's not just some legal question that's on the margins.
Let me follow that on and push you a bit on this question about, well, there's a grand strategic question about SCO and the Eurasian Union and these kind of proto-institutions.
Yeah.
Are there any basis for a new institutional base for a new world order, or are they simply tools of realpolitik?
These are tools for Russia to be able to expand its sphere of influence, as it likes to call it, on its periphery. I would note a couple interesting developments with regards to the CSTO. One, that CSTO member Belarus has declared that it will not participate in missions outside of Belarusian territory, which I think is very significant. And then as far as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict goes, Russia has declared that the CSTO pledge is applicable only to Armenian territory proper and not to Nagorno-Karabakh, which is recognized as Azerbaijani sovereign territory. So the implications of the CSTO, I think, are not as great as some would choose to believe.
Thank you. We've got 12 minutes left, and I want to invite Sverker and Janis to talk about Nordic-Baltic cooperation and its significance.
Well, let's start. I think there is an enormous potential, but somehow from my personal opinion, we always turn it's a question of priorities, because what we do always, we like to talk about joint procurements, because I don't know why it's so sexy, because and it's the most difficult thing what you can achieve, joint procurements, but politicians like those things. But from operational part of operational perspective, how and it also relates to all those smart defense or things like that. If you look on our operational theater, how what we worry about security of supply, we can't afford, let's say, to buy equipment and have maintenance facilities in Sweden or even in Estonia and Lithuania, because we will not be able, in time of crisis, transport them there, and we will not be able to transport munition from there, and that is, I think, big issue. And we have to understand that is not something. If you not ensure security of supply, there is no reason for do that. But talking about priorities, I think what we have to do more joint early warning. Things like exchange of radar data, intelligence exchange, to do more operational planning, and many other things where we get more operability, interoperability, and of course I mentioned it already before. Among Baltics, that we have to think also more about joint or similar command structures.
Second.
Yeah, I would argue, as I said initially, if we want to be able to act and also react once in a while when we are slow, we need to prepare to be able to do so. And that's what we're doing land, sea, and air. Yeah. We take exercises to the Baltic states and vice versa. And we need to continue to do so, because that's a very clear statement and a signal also to whoever is looking and listening that we are getting to prepared to defend the goals and values that we have put up. And I would argue that it's even more necessary for us as small nations, where the economy might be good, but it's still small. But that said, we still need to improve the investment in capabilities. There is no doubt in my mind. You can't close one eye and think you are still able to do everything.
Thank you. Right, let's wrap up. I'm not going to sum up. Bastian first, in reverse order. Last remarks.
Yeah, just a few things to pick from, and in reaction. I think, on the spending question, the 2% question, I personally, as an input metric, I think it is only so useful. I think output is actually what counts. If you apply the metric project forward for Germany, for example, if you applied it, a factor in GDP growth, Germany would have a defense budget in 2020 of about 70 billion euros. If you did that, that's not going to happen. There's only so much mileage you can get from that conversation, and also from saying that the US is the benchmark, because I think a lot of Europeans don't think we have the same kind of ambition, even in a relative scale. One point about these cooperation frameworks, I think there are very regional ones, or very, very sub-regional ones, one should say, but there are also things like the Northern Group, which involve the UK, which involve Germany, and others, and countries here in the region, of course. So there's potential there to find interesting and innovative measures in frameworks that perhaps are not yet as visible, but could become so in the future. So, and my final remark is, it's interesting. We are looking here at the Twitter feed on these little two screens here in front, and it's interesting that some of the things that are attributed to us, I don't think we've actually said. So I wonder whether this Twitter feed is actually a vulnerability to our personal reputation.
Hybrid warfare.
Hybrid warfare, indeed. But thank you very much.
Sverker.
First of all, I would say that we need to, on both the political level as well as the military level, define our core values, as I tried to say, to be able to develop the type of strategy we would like to see, both in Europe and in relation Europe-United States. Because doing so, it will also allow us to define how do we want and have to develop something called Total Defense 3.0, as I argued, with a whole of security and functioning society approach. And by doing so, depending on which country we are, we can take bits and pieces of this total defense and put them together by cooperation, and the effectiveness will then grow. But that said, I still say, and I want that to be the bottom line, we need to reinvest in military capabilities, because we have left that out for some time. So there is a depth there that we need to deal with.
Yanis.
Yes, I completely agree with what General said right now, because we always tend to look on civilian side and say, well, probably we can develop, I don't know, find new bumper sticker, and it will, and the threats will go away. So it doesn't work. We have to go back to the roots. And I think what is most important that we have in front of us a very clear picture what's happening, and we have to understand this picture. Otherwise, I think sometimes we pretend that, well, that tank is not tank, that is probably only and that is a problem with hybrid warfare, because hybrid warfare is not about something what Russians are trying to pretend. That is the problem with us. We don't want to see what we see really. And that is basically the same goes for what was mentioned, this slow warfare. If we want, we will see, and if there is a political will, we will see what is there, and we will not pretend. Therefore, I think it's very important, and it goes also for European Army. Well, there are so many issues what the European Union can do on those resilience things, starting from media, starting from energy security, and many other things. Let's join those forces. Let's build European, more heavy fighting force in Europe. But what we certainly don't need another headquarters which will fight with papers. Well, the paper warfare already gone. Thank you.
Mike.
So I will just remind that the 2014 Wales Summit pledge was not just for 2% of GDP, but 20% of defense spending devoted to capital investments, which is crucial given the modernization and the capabilities that are needed. But I think it is deeply troubling to make the argument that, oh, well, 2% is not a valid benchmark because it's not politically feasible. Tell that to the American voters. You're seeing right now this debate in the United States. Don't assume that this trend will go away. We need to demonstrate again that allies have skin in the game. This is something that is not to be taken lightly. And then finally, on resilience, I would just point out, I think resilience is obviously important for all of our allies, and that's why we're talking about it here today. But our allies also have Article 5, which is unique. Our partners do not. And so building resilience for partners outside of the alliance, I'm thinking of countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and others, is vital. And we are spending a lot of money doing that, $600 million on Ukraine, on their security establishment since the start of the conflict. Many tens of millions spent on Georgia over the past decade. We don't see the same contribution of resources from our friends and allies in Europe. They're your neighbors. You need to invest in them too. I'm sorry if this sounds like I'm lecturing, but again, if we're dealing with security threats across the board and we're thinking about what motivates, what fans the flames of ambition in Moscow, it is the ability to get away with these sorts of invasions and occupations that we've seen outside of NATO Europe, and those need to be dealt with in an equally, with a manner with the same degree of seriousness and resolve as the challenges to the alliance.
Mike, thank you. We do need to hear what you say. Before I adjourn this session, I've got 3 brief messages. The actual takeaways, I think, from this panel about total defense ? Are 1, do we mean what we say? Words and deeds. It's about time that we do mean what we say. 2, if you want to have skin in a big game, the more skin you invest in a big game, the more influence you will have over it. And 3, are we up to the challenge? I'm not sure. I'm not even sure we actually know what the challenge is. So before we can be absolutely assured that total defence is achieved, an awful lot more robust thinking is required. Second point, straight after this panel, there is a book launch in this auditorium on EU strategy towards Syria. It includes a chapter from me, which is of course brilliant and very much worth listening to. And three, finally, and most importantly, I'd like to thank an outstanding panel for their contribution. Gentlemen, thank you very much.